Hello, I am Mike.
Hello, I am Lily. Welcome to English Podcast Flow. All right, let's jump right into something that I think a lot of us kind of struggle with almost every day.
Okay.
You read a really fascinating article, or you invest a couple hours in a really good book,
Hmm.
and then, a little while later, it's like the vast majority of that information has just kind of vanished from your mind.
Right.
You're left with this vague sense that you read something cool, but you can't really remember the details.
Yeah, it's like it just kind of like evaporates.
It's really frustrating to put in all that time and energy and then feel like it didn't stick.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think what's fascinating about this is that our typical approach to reading is so often passive.
Okay.
It's like we're trying to pour information into this empty vessel
Right.
and hoping that it'll just like magically stick there.
Yeah.
But the reality is that for effective learning, for memory to work,
Yeah.
you need to actively engage with the material.
Okay.
If you don't connect that new information to what you already know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a leaf in the wind.
Mhm.
It flutters around for a bit, but it doesn't really take root.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
So that brings us to what we're talking about today. People
Right.
who read a ton and actually remember it all.
Right.
Like Bill Gates.
Yeah, he's a great example.
It's not just about reading a lot, right?
No, not at all.
It's about remembering it and using it later.
Exactly. And if we think about this in the context of how we learn and acquire knowledge,
Yeah.
understanding how someone like Bill Gates approaches reading
Yeah.
can be really valuable for all of us.
Absolutely.
It's not about having a photographic memory.
Okay.
It's about using specific strategies that help you understand and remember things better.
So it's something we can actually learn to do.
Absolutely. And I think a good question for our listeners to think about is
Yeah.
how much of what you read do you actually feel like you remember and can use later?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
So that's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
The strategies that Bill Gates uses to remember so much of what he reads. We've gathered a bunch of different information and we're going to break it all down for you.
All right.
So you can maybe try out some of these techniques yourself.
Awesome.
And the really interesting thing is that it seems like a lot of his success comes down to making connections.
Connections.
Yeah, between different pieces of information.
Right, that makes sense.
Our brains are really good at remembering things when we can link them to other things we know.
Yeah, studies show that one of the most fundamental ways our brains store and retrieve information is through these networks of associations.
Okay?
When we learn something new, our brains don't treat it as a completely separate thing.
Right.
They try to connect it to things we already know.
So it's like building a web.
Exactly. The more connections you make,
Yeah.
the stronger your memory becomes.
Okay, so can you give an example of how that works in practice?
Sure, imagine you're trying to learn about a new city.
Okay.
If you don't know anything about its history or geography,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to remember anything
Mm.
about it. But if you already know something about the region it's in or the time period it was founded,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes much easier to learn new things about it.
Because you have a framework to put it
Oh,
in.
exactly.
Right?
You can
Hmm.
connect that new information to what you already know.
So it's not just about stuffing our brains with random facts.
Mm.
It's about actively trying to link them to what we already understand.
That's the key.
So how can someone actually do that while they're reading?
Well, there are a few things you can do.
Okay.
One is to ask yourself questions as you read.
Like what kind of questions?
Like, how does this relate to something I've learned before?
Okay.
Or does this confirm or challenge what I thought I knew?
So you're actively engaging with the material.
Exactly. You're forcing your brain to make connections.
Right.
Another good technique is to take notes and summarize what you've read.
So put it into your own words.
Yeah, that helps you process it more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And you could also try creating concept maps or diagrams.
To visualize the connection.
Yeah, that can be really helpful.
So it's like you're building this mental scaffolding.
Exactly. And the more you read,
Yeah.
the more extensive that scaffolding becomes.
And the easier it is to remember new things.
Exactly, because you have more connection points.
It's like having a bigger web.
That's a great way to think about it.
So the act of reading widely actually helps us remember more.
Yeah, the more you know,
Mm-hmm.
the easier it is to learn new things.
It's a positive feedback loop.
Exactly. Knowledge builds on knowledge.
Okay, so building this base of knowledge is super important.
Yeah, it's foundational.
But it's not just about having a bunch of random facts in our heads. It's
Mm.
about having a framework to organize them.
It appears that there's this concept of a mental framework.
Can you explain what that is and how it helps us remember things?
Sure, a mental framework is basically a deep understanding of how different concepts and ideas within a specific field are related.
Okay.
It's like having a mental blueprint.
A blueprint.
Yeah, that helps you see how new information fits into the bigger picture.
Like a pestle.
Exactly. If you have the picture on the box, it's much easier to put the puzzle together.
Right.
And a mental framework does the same thing for learning.
So instead of just memorizing a random date, you understand how that date fits into a larger historical context.
Exactly. You see the connections and the relationships.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you're learning about the Battle of Hastings.
Yeah.
Instead of just memorizing that it happened in 1066,
Yeah.
you would also learn about the events leading up to the battle,
Okay.
the people involved, the consequences, and how it shaped English history.
So you're building a more complete picture.
Exactly. And then when you learn new things about that time period,
Yeah.
you can easily connect them to that existing framework.
It all starts to make more sense.
Right. The information becomes part of a coherent narrative.
So it's like understanding the rules of a game before you start playing.
Exactly. Once you know the rules,
Yeah.
you can understand how the different moves and pieces work together.
That's a good analogy.
Thanks. So how does reading widely contribute to building these mental frameworks?
Okay, so we're building these frameworks by reading broadly
Mm-hmm.
and actively trying to make connections.
Yes, and one thing that Bill Gates emphasizes
Okay.
is the importance of learning about science through the stories of scientists.
Really? Why is that so important?
Well, it's because humans are naturally drawn to stories.
Okay.
Stories provide context and emotion.
So they're more engaging.
Exactly, and they make the information more memorable.
So instead of just learning about Newton's laws of motion,
Right.
you would also learn about Isaac Newton himself.
Exactly. His life, his struggles, his discoveries,
Okay.
that makes the science more relatable and interesting.
And easier to remember.
Yeah, because you're not just memorizing facts.
Yeah.
You're learning about the people behind those facts.
So you're humanizing the science.
Exactly.
And I imagine that can also be really inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. It shows that even the greatest minds
Yeah.
face challenges and setbacks.
But they persevered.
Exactly. And that can be really motivating for learners.
Okay, so it's about seeing science as a human endeavor,
Yeah, it's about understanding the process of discovery.
not just the end result.
Right, and that makes it much more engaging.
So another technique that Bill Gates uses
Mm-hmm.
is organizing knowledge using mental maps and timelines.
Ah, yes. Those are great tools.
Can you explain how those work?
Sure. A mental map is basically a visual representation of how different concepts are related.
Okay.
You start with the central idea
Yeah.
and then branch out to related subtopics and details.
So it's like a tree.
Exactly. You can see the connections at a glance.
And that helps you remember the information better.
Yeah, because you're actively organizing it in your mind.
Can you give an example?
Sure, imagine you're reading about climate change.
Okay.
Your central idea would be climate change.
Yeah.
And then you'd have branches for things like causes, effects, and solutions.
Okay.
And then you could break those down further into sub-branches.
So you're creating a hierarchy of information,
Exactly. And that helps you see the bigger picture.
and a timeline is for organizing information chronologically.
Exactly. You can see the sequence of events
Okay.
and understand how they relate to each other.
Like the example we talked about with ancient Rome and Queen Victoria.
Yeah, without a timeline,
Yeah.
it's hard to see how those two things fit together.
But on a timeline,
Right.
it becomes clear that they're separated by a huge span of time.
Exactly. The timeline provides context.
So both mental maps and timelines help us organize information.
Yeah, and that makes it much easier to remember.
Now, we've talked about how learning can be challenging at first.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Can you explain how the more we learn,
Yeah,
the easier it becomes to learn new things?
sure. Learning is a cumulative process.
Okay.
At first, when you're learning something new,
Yeah.
it can be really difficult.
Because you don't have any existing knowledge to connect it to.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a puzzle without the picture.
Right.
But as you learn more,
Mhm.
you start to build a foundation.
A foundation.
Yeah. And then it becomes easier to connect new information to that foundation.
So it's like building a house.
Yeah.
Okay.
At first, you have to lay the groundwork,
Okay.
but once the foundation is there,
Yeah.
you can start building walls and a roof.
Makes sense.
And over time, that house becomes more and more complete.
So our understanding of a subject becomes more complete.
Exactly. The more you learn,
Yeah.
the easier it is to learn even more.
It's like that reservoir you were talking about before.
That's a great way to think about it.
At first, it fills up slowly,
Mm-hmm.
but as it gets fuller,
Right?
it fills up faster and faster.
Exactly. Because there's more water to build upon.
So our knowledge base grows exponentially.
That's a good way to put it.
And as that happens, our memory improves as well.
Yeah, because we have more connections to help us retrieve information.
So it's all about building those connections.
Absolutely, they're the key to learning and memory.
Now, another important aspect of Bill Gates' approach is that he actively questions and verifies the information he reads.
That's so important.
It's not just about blindly accepting everything you see.
Right, you have to be critical.
So if he comes across something that doesn't seem quite right,
Yeah.
he investigates it further.
He doesn't just take it at face value.
Exactly. And that helps him identify any misunderstandings or inaccuracies.
It's like having a built-in fact checker.
Right. And it also forces you to think more deeply about the information.
Absolutely, you're engaging with it on a deeper level.
And that strengthens your memory.
Yes, because you're processing it more thoroughly.
And it also highlights the importance of getting information from multiple sources.
Oh, definitely.
You're more likely to encounter different perspectives.
And that helps you develop a more balanced understanding.
So it's not just about reading one book on a topic.
Nope, you want to get a variety of viewpoints.
And that helps you identify potential biases.
Exactly. You can see the bigger picture.
So questioning and verifying is really essential for learning.
Yeah, it's how we make sure our knowledge is accurate and complete.
Now, there's this really interesting analogy that Bill Gates uses.
Okay, what is it?
He compares knowledge to the game of chess.
Chess. That's interesting.
Yeah, he says that knowledge is like the pieces on a chessboard.
Okay, I'm curious to hear more.
So in chess, the pieces are arranged in a specific way.
Right.
They're not just randomly placed.
It's all of the rules of the game.
Exactly. And if you understand those rules,
Yeah.
you can understand why the pieces are where they are.
And even predict future moves.
Right. And that makes it easier to remember the position of the pieces.
Makes sense.
So how does this apply to learning?
Well, knowledge is like the chess pieces.
Okay.
And our mental frameworks are like the rules of the game.
So if our knowledge is well organized, it's easier to remember and understand.
Exactly, just like remembering the position of chess pieces.
But if our knowledge is just a bunch of random facts,
Mhm.
it's like a chessboard with the pieces randomly placed.
It's hard to make sense of it.
And even harder to remember.
That's a great analogy.
So it all comes back to building those strong mental frameworks.
Absolutely, they're the key to effective learning.
So we've talked about all these different strategies.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
How can our listeners actually apply this to their own reading?
That's the important part.
What are some practical steps they can take?
All right, so first, when you start learning something new,
Okay.
focus on building a broad mental framework.
Like the blueprint.
Exactly.
Mm.
Understand the basic concepts and how they're related.
So get the big picture first.
Yeah, and then you can fill in the details later.
And second, pay attention to the narratives.
Yes, the stories behind the discoveries and ideas.
That makes it more interesting and memorable.
Exactly. Humans love stories.
And third, use visual tools like mind maps and timelines.
Yeah, those can be really helpful for organizing information.
So get creative with your note-taking.
And fourth, don't be afraid to question and verify what you read.
Be an active reader.
Exactly. Engage with the material critically.
And finally, remember that learning takes time.
Yeah, it's a cumulative process.
Don't get discouraged if you don't get it right away.
Be patient and persistent.
So those are the key takeaways.
Yeah, 5 great strategies for improving your reading and learning.
And the most important thing is to actively engage with the material.
Absolutely. Don't just passively read the words.
Think about them, question them, connect them.
And organize them in a way that makes sense to you.
So it's not about having a perfect memory,
Nope, it's about using the right strategies.
like Bill Gates does.
Exactly. He makes reading an active and engaging process.
So try out some of these techniques in your next reading session.
See what works for you.
And remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
Absolutely, every step counts.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure talking about this.
We hope you found it helpful.
And remember, learning is a journey.
So enjoy the ride.
Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.